welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. This week we have seen the utter collapse of the Assad regime and the Baathist political ideology in Syria. This follows a year of crisis and turmoil in the Middle East, and absolute uncertainty in the days ahead as power centers shift completely and foreign militaries, including the Turks, Israel, and the US, race to take advantage of the power vacuum and chaos that remains. This is all happening as a new administration is poised to take over in January. Trump's nominees for foreign policy and national security are what you would say a mixed bag. But one, Tulsi Gabbard, who was nominated for Director of National Intelligence, seems to be igniting partisan fires like no other candidate. Interestingly, the Army Reserve officer, former congresswoman, and Iraq war veteran has been most prescient when it comes to U.S. intervention in the Middle East. She has warned consistently about meddling in the politics of Syria, taking sides in internecine conflicts, and maintaining an aggressive military footprint inside the country. She, to this day, is drawing fire for her 2017 visit with Bashar Assad because, in her words, quote, "I did so because I felt that it's important that if we profess to truly care about the Syrian people, about their suffering, then we've got to be able to meet with anyone that we need to if there is a possibility that we can achieve peace. Whatever you think about President Assad, the fact is that he is the president of Syria. In order for any peace agreement, in order for any possibility of a viable peace agreement to occur, there has to be a conversation with him." Nevertheless, nearly, I think it was 100 former national security officials penned a letter recently saying that they were, quote, alarmed at her nomination and urged closed-door hearings to go over her record, saying that following her trip to Syria, Ms. Gabbard aligned herself with Russian and Syrian officials. She has been called a traitor and a foreign agent by Democrats who want to tank her nomination. But more than 250 conservative military veterans responded this week with their own letter saying, quote, "Tulsi's life exemplifies a rare blend of selflessness, courage, and leadership, qualities desperately needed to reform and strengthen our intelligence community," they said. "We are appalled by the baseless attacks questioning Tulsi's loyalty to our great nation. For over 20 years and across multiple combat deployments, Tulsi has risked her life to defend the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. These attacks insult not only her, but every one of us veterans who have served our country," end quote. Tulsi faces a hard road, but it is not difficult to see that she has been prescient in so many ways. As much of the American regime change wars of the last 40 years have come to destructive fruition just in the last few days. Today, the U.S. insists on keeping military forces in Syria to fight ISIS, a branch of the Islamists that Washington helped to create by its invasion and overthrow of Saddam Hussein 20 years ago. So, here to talk about Tulsi's road to confirmation ahead and what is going on in Syria today, as well as maybe some other foreign policy hotspots, is Lyle Goldstein, Director of China Policy for Defense Priorities, and a good friend of the show, Michael Vlahos, who is a fellow at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. So Lyle, we chatted a bit offline and you seem pretty off-put about the attacks on Tulsi. Can you talk a little bit about why you think she has drawn this vicious backlash? Like I've heard her called compromised by Democratic leaders as though she was some sort of Manchurian candidate, and why you personally think that she would make a good DNI and doesn't deserve these attacks.
Yes, thanks very much, Kelly. And I think this is such an important topic. Really, I think she is a kind of a revolutionary thinker in the sense that she brings like all kinds of fresh ideas. And so for those of us who have been, favoring realism and restraint, who want to see a strong U.S. military, but one that is not about to go to war, every other day in some other part of the world. She's really seems to be the kind of perfect person for this important position. And just, looking across at the things that she's achieved and the issues that she's worked in, I think you use the word prescient, and yes, I mean that's what I see is she warned us over and over that these endless wars in the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq, and what we've been doing in Syria. She warned us all along that these have been mistakes. She was very brave, I thought, and called out the war in Ukraine as let's say highly problematic, and she pointed immediately after the start of the war to the fact that let's say we have some culpability in how this came about. It's not to say that there are simple solutions, but the point is she understands that you have to know why the war came about if you have any chance to try to end it. And I think if we're to understand why she's so good on all these issues, I come back to a few things. I mean, for one, well, everybody knows she served in the Iraq War. I think she did two combat deployments. I mean, she was in the she was serving in a medical battalion, I think. So it wasn't like frontline combat, but she's one of the things she saw was a lot of casualties, and that affected her. This is a woman who understands the cost of war across the board, and the horrible waste that some of these interventions cost. But also a couple more things. She being I mean, it's interesting that she has a National Guard background, and to me, that is a slightly different perspective, of the weekend warrior. And I know some active duty people may kind of look down on that, and say, well, that's not real professional military background. But actually, these people have good understanding of civilian society, of American society. They're not totally detached. But they also have, a good window, I think, into military affairs, and are strongly rooted in the tradition, that founded our country, right? The Minutemen, the citizen soldier. This is a very important tradition and one we should celebrate. And I'm glad that she'll have that perspective. Finally, as a person from Hawaii, she knows a lot about the Asia Pacific. I will tell you for sure. She was watching the very delicate Korean nuclear crisis. She had an eye on that and saw what happened to Hawaii when they went under that alert for an incoming missile. I know that is something that very much affected her. I know she's deployed to places like Indonesia, critical parts of the Asia Pacific. But the final thing I'll say, she's very attuned to, because of that, well, for many reasons, but she's very attuned to the major dangers that unfortunately are stalking us, and that these include the nuclear threats, that are escalating almost day by day. And I want to have intelligence leaders and leaders at the top of our key national security leaders to have their eye on this issue of nuclear strategy, but also how to de-escalate, how to control and make sure that we do not sleepwalk ourselves into a total catastrophe, which I fear is quite possible, and on so many fronts. On Iran, on Ukraine, on North Korea, yes, and on China. So these are major concerns, and she is the right person to grapple with them.
Yeah, and she's been very consistent, and I think that's why she's drawn so much fire from her fellow Democrats, at least the sort of neoliberal center left Democrat leadership of the Hillary Clinton, Pelosi onward. Because when I first came upon Tulsi Gabbard, it was several years ago while she was in Congress, and she was fighting for veterans' health care. And I had attended a hearing about the burn pits. And she went up and down on the VA representative who was testifying, because basically they're saying, well, we got to do more studies about the health effects of the burn pits on veterans. She's like, no more studies. I've heard this too many times, and I want the truth, and I want these veterans taken care of. And I said, who is this person? I had no idea who she was. And then I started following.
Kelly, this is a woman who is fearless and fearless
She's got a backbone.
about speaking the truth, and that is so needed in Washington. I mean, especially I should say I think in the intelligence community, that's most highly valued. Really, this, especially for somebody, who's relatively young, so she's deeply impressive. I've had the chance to spend some time around her. Thoughtful, wants to get acquainted with the facts, doesn't make snap judgments, and but once she arrives at a conclusion, she will stick with her principles. It's very admirable.
So, Mike, I want to ask you, because you have some background in the intelligence community early on in your own career. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Tulsi Gabbard in this DNI position? It's a relatively new position post 9/11, created in order to sort of conflict or contradict all of the stovepiping that had been going on among the intelligence community and allow for some streamlining. You had mentioned to me offline that there was such a role decades ago. Can you talk a little bit about the DNI, what you think of that particular office, and whether you think someone like Tulsi Gabbard would be a good fit for that office?
First of all, the DNI is not a new position. It's a redundantly ersatz position. In other words, the DNI replaces what had been the DCI, the Director of Central Intelligence, which was established on January 23rd, 1946. And the head of Central Intelligence was the head of all intelligence. And the rise of all these military intelligence agencies, like, all of the Army intelligence, Navy intelligence, and then, of course, defense intelligence, and then others, created a panoply of competing agendas that the Director of Central Intelligence could not control, because he ultimately became, that is to say, the DCI ultimately became just another agency representing, in the case of the CIA, the executive branch. And so there were just lots of battles. And so the creation in 2004 of the DNI was supposed to create some kind of new overarching authority, which was just the old overarching authority somehow made new.
Yeah.
But the context here is important in the sense that there is an argument within what has been historically since 1946 that I think supports the case for Tulsi Gabbard. And if you would, for just a second, I've only known 3 DCIs or DNIs: Richard Helms, Stansfield Turner, and of course, the second DNI, Mike McConnell. And they're kind of interesting archetypes when you contrast and compare them. Richard Helms was the good old boy, Ivy League, old school CIA head. And the contrast with him came during the Carter administration, when Carter, after the Church Committee and all of the contretemps over the CIA and its activities in Angola and elsewhere in Central America, was given a mandate by the new president to clean house at the CIA. And I knew Stansfield Turner really quite well. I mean, he was my boss at CIA, but then he was later someone I knew from the Naval War College, where, of course, I later taught. So, and he was really kind of a prototype for what Tulsi Gabbard can become. And here the contrast to recent DNIs is important. Mike McConnell, who was a nice guy, a vice admiral. Of course, you don't get to be a Navy flag or an Army general officer, I should include the Air Force, unless you're a nice guy. And so he was a go along, get along guy, and that's what they all are. They go along and get along with whatever the larger agenda of the hive, or we can call it the blob, or we can call it the establishment, whatever that wants. And so none of them are really chieftains or leaders, as they should have been, as they were envisaged in 1946. And Stansfield Turner really cleaned house. He got rid of much of the Directorate of Operations. All the people had been engaged in those nefarious activities in Angola and Central America. And that was all to the good of not just the CIA, but for intelligence as a whole. So I think there maybe is the historical authority and mandate for Tulsi Gabbard. And I wanted to see, Lyle, what you might think of that case to be made for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think she could play a really pivotal role and even transformational role here. You know, to my estimate, intelligence has gone off the rails to some respect. I mean, I would say, hey, the very idea that we have 18 separate intelligence agencies,
Right.
it seems on its face somewhat ridiculous. And then, but beyond that, to consider just how many areas of the world we have our, let's say, our hands in the as it were, in the pot, doing the cooking, and that's inappropriate. And I think she's willing to, question assumptions, which is critical, maybe break some things, maybe decide that our intelligence agency, for our republic, is something so far beyond what the founders would have been comfortable with, right? I mean, they themselves were, if you read the Federalist Papers, it's all about, the dangers of a standing army. But what they were really saying is they did not want the republic to be extinguished by, a kind of deep state. And so she brings a fair amount of skepticism to this, but not as a complete outsider. I mean, because she has had a window. She's, been at war. She's seen the costs of huge mistakes. I mean, for God's sakes, the biggest intelligence screw up of the last couple of decades was, of course, the WMD fiasco in Iraq, and she and her fellow soldiers were victims of that first and foremost. So I mean, she brings that to heart. I will say, I'm at Brown University, director of their China initiative here now, and teaching here on war and strategy. And we had a visitor here at Brown to the Watson Institute, the current DNI, Avril Haines. And she was quite impressive, kind of surveying across. And I must say, she has a law background, and she's kind of explained why her kind of national security law background was really important to, if we want to protect the civil rights of Americans. I'm not sure we've done a very good job on that front, but I was definitely impressed by the gravity of what is being undertaken by the Office of the Director here, and I do also want to add that I believe the ODNI is going to put together, the daily brief for the president, and here I think Tulsi's willingness to entertain, counter arguments, not just accept, the conventional wisdom. We've done it this way forever, and we believe, that it shall always be this way. I mean, so I think what she will do is bring in evidence on both sides and let the two sides compete. And that really is the foundation. That's why our country is so great, because we allow that kind of competition of ideas and let each side bring its evidence. And I think that's the kind of intelligence agency. I think she will make sure that ethic pervades our intelligence community in a way it has not. For too long, we've kind of let the Keystone Cops run wild, and seems to me. And let's face it, I mean, the reason that a lot of Democrats hate Tulsi is she raised some tough questions during way back, when, if you can remember, on Russiagate and then the impeachment and so forth. So she didn't buy into any of those narratives, to her credit. And subsequently, it's become clear, as we've said, that she happens to be right on all these things. So this is a woman who brings, incredible integrity and an ethic of let's weigh the arguments and weigh the evidence.
Yeah, you guys make some tremendous points, and particularly on Stansfield Turner, and then and looking ahead at what Tulsi might do to reflect some of his spirit of disruption and transformation. The unfortunate truth is that her ability to critique and her ability to push back and stand up to the forces of the establishment, which would be necessary for her to actually be successful in the role, are what has put her in this position of being called a Russian asset, a Putinist, an Assadist, compromised person. And it wasn't until, they all liked Tulsi when she first burst on the scene as an Iraq War veteran, a woman. She's Samoan, white woman. She's checking all the boxes of what a progressive political movement would like to see on Capitol Hill, as well as her fight for veterans and veterans health care. It wasn't until she started poking holes in regime change wars and got right to the elite Democratic project on Capitol Hill, in the halls or the pantheon of our the Democratic presidents, whether they be Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton at the State Department and whatnot. And she went after Hillary, and she went after Hillary in a way that drew most of the fire on her. And it was a critique of the Libyan invasion and the bombing, the NATO-led bombing that the Americans had been so hot for, the Democrat Barack Obama administration had been so hot for. And then she brought that critique into her 2020 campaign for president. And we all know how she basically took down Kamala Harris, and she took down others on regime change wars as a veteran. And you saw that steely spine that she brought to her arguments. And she was pretty much finished there. And I'm afraid that those qualities are what are going to trip up, or at least make her confirmation battle that much more difficult, because they don't see her as somebody who could actually not only streamline, but could actually bring some sense and realism to the intelligence community and our capacities. Rather, they see her as a partisan problem. And that's unfortunate, particularly on the Ukraine war. Both of you have been writing about Ukraine, and she's been pretty right about it. And I'm looking at a Newsweek article where she said on Twitter in 2022, "Dear Presidents Putin, Zelensky, and Biden, it's time to put geopolitics aside and embrace the spirit of aloha, respect, and love for the Ukrainian people by coming to an agreement that Ukraine will be a neutral country, no military alliance with NATO or Russia, and therefore alleviate the legitimate security concerns of both US and NATO countries, as well as Russia, because there would be no Russian or NATO troops on each other's non-Baltic borders. This would allow the Ukrainian people to live in peace." Well, guess what? A lot of people are saying that today, but that was in 2022. She put her neck out there.
Yeah, that's right. She was saying it before it was, it's increasingly becoming conventional wisdom, that this was the major cause of the war. And of course, some of us have been saying this forever, but she came out very bravely and was saying it right away, and she was not backing down, which is incredible. But yes, go ahead, Kelly, you finish.
No, yeah. Well, I was just looking at what's going on in Syria today, and I know some folks have come out and tried to raise this visit that she had with Bashar Assad in 2017, and basically saying, and kind of poking fun and saying, oh, bad timing for Tulsi Gabbard, the overthrow of Assad, her best friend. And I'm thinking, you know what? Tulsi never said that she was friends with Bashar Assad. She never said nice things about Bashar Assad, which she's been accused of. But what she did say is that we need to talk to our enemies, and we do not need to be meddling in the affairs of Syria. We do not need 900 troops continuously there as targets. And she's been, pretty right about the fact that there was this cauldron building that could blow up at any minute. That's what I'm looking at, Mike. But do you think that you think the haters even care about any of that? And can you talk a little bit about what's happening in Syria today, and how maybe she was borne out in a lot of these prognostications or critiques that she's had about our foreign policy there?
I think there's a bigger issue here, and the whole Syrian gambit on the part mostly of Democrats, but a certain amount of establishment Republicans, is a kind of misdirection. It's a red herring. And I think what is going on is an attempt to garrote her confirmation, because in many ways, the threat that she represents to the establishment is the threat to CIA, other intelligence agencies, mostly CIA and FBI, spying on Americans and engaged in deep state operations to prevent Trump from taking office in 2016, and essentially developing an entire attack plan against him during the time he was president and after. And it's been a deep corruption of the CIA. Now, it was one thing, because I brought up Stansfield Turner for a reason. He is a model and a prototype, maybe even an archetype. But I mean, he had to deal with CIA corruption when it came to American misadventures abroad. But the more fateful and deeper corruption is the way in which the CIA has become an instrument of the deep state, not in some kind of cliched way, but an instrument of an imperial regime to go against political enemies domestically, and ultimately the American people themselves. I mean, it's been going on for a long time, and it involves the surveillance of Americans, all their emails and communications, and this has been something that's been building, and it presages a kind of encroaching tyranny. So I think one of the most powerful elements in her candidacy is the potential that she can work with someone like Kash Patel to really bring American intelligence services back to their original charter and mission, which is to spy on other people, not on Americans, and not to conduct political ops against domestic
good point.
Parties. And I just would be curious as to how you think about that, Lyle.
Yes, I agree emphatically, and I think that there's been so much, really wholesale, inappropriate behavior. It's there's so many examples. It's hard to know which one to alight on. But the whole. I mean, we can go all the way back to the 2016 election, where I think it was some kind of meeting that of the ODNI where they said they didn't have concrete evidence of Russian interference, but everything, their hunch was that there was, and there was. That was the assessment, and therefore, these intelligence experts said there was interference, and so that immediately, of course, questioned Trump's legitimacy and put him on the back foot, and for the rest of his presidency, he was hamstrung by this. All these, frankly, what amounted to silly allegations. And having read the Mueller report, I mean, you can look. They investigated every thread. It saw there was no there. So it's a recurrent pattern now, and I agree with you fully, Mike, that this is a set of egregious behaviors that need to be rooted out and checked, and get people in the intelligence world. I've spent some time in Langley and spent quite a bit of time at the Office of Naval Intelligence. So I'm aware that there are some very smart and even brilliant people and very patriotic people who want to do the right thing, but the kind of politicization of intelligence is abhorrent, and that involves assumptions. And I have to bring up an example related to Ukraine, which really I think is, again, just shows just how far down this unfortunate road we've gone. But I think it came out, I believe, in spring 2023, that we had like an enormous CIA presence in Ukraine that went back about a decade, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Including, all kinds of underground bunkers near the borders, and,
right,
very elaborate.
You're training saboteurs as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine if if a foreign power had such a intelligence outpost on our border, it would be 5 minutes before we weren't at war. So I mean, and all of this is unknown, so we've gone through all these steps of escalation and war in Ukraine, and yet the American people have never known about this very deep engagement between the CIA and Ukraine. It was I mean, right. Of course, many of us kind of guessed that this was the case, but now that this all comes out in the open, this is scandalous, and it fully explains, partly why we're on the brink of war and even nuclear war, and this is completely ridiculous, and just shows how the intelligence agencies are not under the firm control of somebody with wisdom and judgment and ready to exercise, control and restraint. And we're being led down the garden path of endless war and crisis after crisis, which could go wrong.
Well, I hope she gets a fair hearing in her confirmation trials or hearing, or whatever you want to call it, at the Senate level. I know that Democrats are lining up to smear her. They've gotten all these national security types to come sign letters saying that they need a closed door hearing because they have to investigate her record. But let's put it on the line here. She is still a military officer. She's still an Army officer. If she was compromised, they would have kicked her to the curb a long time ago. So all of this is theater. They're going to try to tank her. If Republicans stick together, she'll get through, and we'll have to watch it. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I'd like to thank you both for coming on and making such incredible points, that the history, the hopes, the parameters of what of her new role if she is confirmed, and the reforms that are necessary. Thank you both, Michael and Lyle, for pointing all that out and reminding us what needs to happen in our intelligence community today.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Yeah, this is an important conversation. Really appreciate it.